Hi, I'm Dr. Lori Stevick Rust, clinical health psychologist and former board member for the Centers for Dialysis Care. I've seen you. I may not know each and every one of you personally, but I've seen the work that you do. I spent 14 years in the VA hospital in the nephrology and the dialysis units, and I've seen you. I know under the best of circumstances how difficult the job is that you do. Working in very tight conditions, close quarters, under the best of circumstances, you're dealing with a very complicated population with multiple comorbidities, including medical complications, as well as psychological complications, behavioral issues, dealing with families, and now COVID-19. I can only imagine the level of anxiety and stress and fear that you must be feeling collectively as healthcare providers working now under these kinds of circumstances. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time with you talking about you. How can we help and protect and support you? One of the things that I know about anxiety is it can be our best resource and our worst enemy. When anxiety and fear raises our vigilance, keeps us focused, keeps us safe, scanning the environment, making sure that we are doing everything in our power to follow protocols to keep ourselves and the people that we care for healthy, that our anxiety and our fear serves us well. But we know that over time, anxiety that isn't put to good use can wear on us. It attacks our immune system. It wears us down. It keeps our stress hormones high, circulating, but with no place to go. And over time, what that does is, of course, compromise our immune system. And now more than ever, we need to stay our strongest and healthiest, and we need you to do the same. I recognize that the level of anxiety and fear that you must be feeling for your own safety and for the safety of the patients that you care for, as well as the family that you go home to, must be very high. My hope in providing some of these tips and strategies is that you will find a few, cherry pick them out, pick the ones that resonate for you, to help you stay as strong and as resilient as you possibly can during this very difficult time. One of the most important things that we need to do when we are under a great deal of stress and anxiety is to label it. Now, for some of you, again, you may be watching thinking it's not so much that I'm anxious as I am grieving what's happening, or feeling really overwhelmed and sad and depressed about what's happening, or experiencing panic and obsessive thoughts that won't seem to stop and are interfering with your ability to sleep. Whatever your symptoms are, it's important that you label it, that you recognize what's happening, because when we label something, we then begin the steps of being in control of it. So it might sound really light and simple and easy, but recognizing and knowing yourself well enough to label what it is you're experiencing is the first and most important step to getting control over it. The thing that happens with fear, appropriate anxiety, is that our brain focuses only on the negative what ifs. We move into a state of self-preservation and protection. We start to think about, oh my God, what if this happens? And then we play over the scenarios, and they're never really positive scenarios. They're usually the worst scenarios. And so while I acknowledge that there are many potentially dangerous and bad scenarios that we are facing, our brain tends to overestimate those and underestimates our ability to cope with that. So one of the other strategies that I'm going to encourage you to do is to pay close attention to how many things you are saying to yourself and how many images are flashing through your brain of the worst possible scenario, and try to balance that with more appropriate and positive images and scenarios. And the other thing that I wanted to spend a little bit of time on is talking about compassion fatigue. You all are care providers, not only in the work that you do, but I suspect you go home and you're providing care and encouragement and support. And after a while, we end up depleting ourselves. And so it's not an uncommon thing, even in the best of scenarios, for healthcare workers to experience either occasional or persistent compassion fatigue. Let's define what that is. Compassion fatigue is when we reach a place where we are exhausted and burned out and unable to even tap into our own empathy. I know that you are compassionate care providers. I know that you are empathic human beings, or you wouldn't be doing the work that you're doing. But I think it's also important for you to be able to acknowledge and recognize within yourself that there are times that we have to step a little bit away from that and allow ourselves to regroup, provide good self-care for ourselves. Compassion fatigue for most healthcare providers that I've worked with over the years usually leads to a couple of things. Guilt, feeling like I'm not able to provide the care to my patients in the way that I should because I'm exhausted, I'm burned out, and their needs are too big for me to manage right now when I've got my own needs. And I can only imagine that right now, while we're under this pandemic and you're put in a position of risking your own lives to save the people that you're providing care for, that compassion fatigue probably reaches its peak at times with you. I just simply want to acknowledge and want you to acknowledge to yourself that it is a real thing. It exists, and you shouldn't feel guilty or upset that that's happening to you. Acknowledge it as part of the unprecedented times that we're in. And then I want you to be able to go home and regroup. In every way that you possibly can, now more than ever, it's an important time for you to be providing good self-care for yourself. Not only to keep yourself physically and emotionally strong, but to be able to replenish that compassionate side of you so that you can step back into your units, providing the care to the patients that you want to be able to provide and that they deserve. So what are we talking about when we talk about good self-care? When we talk about self-care, one of the primary things, of course, we're talking about is good physical care. I know that you are hyper-vigilant on your jobs. You're doing everything you can to take good care of the patients and maybe even of each other. But when you get back home, it's important to also continue to engage in some self-care, making sure that to the extent that you can, that you are getting really solid, good, adequate sleep, which I recognize is almost a silly thing to be asking of any of us, and certainly of our healthcare providers who are exhausted and working long shifts and then laying down in bed and the thoughts and the worries start to ruminate over, oh my God, what's happening? What could happen tomorrow? But in whatever strategies that you can employ for yourself, it's important now more than ever to get adequate sleep. Sleep is what resets our brain and resets our body and helps us remain resilient in our ability to cope. Making sure, of course, that you're getting good nutrition, which I laugh every time I say that to healthcare providers. They're like, really? Do you think that we actually have time to stop and eat or take a break? My hope is that you will work to support one another to make sure that you are doing that on the job, but that you're also doing that at home. Making sure that you're doing everything you can to keep your physical well-being through good nutrition and sleep as strong as possible. And then, of course, we are, again, in unprecedented times that emotionally we're doing a real number on ourselves. The anxiety, the stress, the worry, the depression, the fatigue, the grief all begins to settle in, particularly when we get home and we are away from providing care and it's just the silence of ourselves and our own thoughts. This is a time for you to really become much more comfortable with the idea that we have to learn, and it's truly a learning curve for all of us, to become comfortable with uncertainty. Now, we all hate that, and I recognize how much we hate that. Most of us want to be in control, some of us more than others, but it's important that we learn that we are not in control of this. And the sooner we acknowledge that there are many things within our control, many of the things that you are doing to take good care of yourself and your patients and your families are within your control. We recognize that with this pandemic, there are many things outside of our control. And once we learn to accept that, and work within the confines of uncertainty, we begin to feel more in control, and our anxiety and our stress absolutely will be lowered. It doesn't happen overnight, and I'm not naive in thinking that you're going to just watch this video and go, oh, good, yeah, I'm real good with all that uncertainty. I recognize it's a big leap, and it's a process, and it's baby steps that we have to take to get there, but it is vital to our ability to be resilient and cope with what's happening, and more specifically to those of you who are on the front lines providing vital care to other people. The other thing that I think is important that we talk a little bit about is to make sure that you are limiting the scope of information that you're trying to take in. My hope is that you are staying educated and informed about what's happening with this virus, and I'm certain you are. But when you come home, there should be that opportunity for some downtime. Not scrolling through social media and reading more and more and more of the scary stories, the information, the misinformation, taking a break from some of the news. We've heard many people talking about that. But I guarantee you that if you can hit the pause button on all that information that's coming in and take a deep collective breath and focus your energy on other information, other positive stories, focusing on the things that are happening that are good in your world, whether that's just in your own family, within the confines of your home, but we absolutely have to find the balance in absorbing all of the negative information and filling in some of the positive. So I hope that you are finding places to find, even if it's just moments of joy, snapshots of humor, snapshots of things that replenish you. And finally, I want to leave you with this message. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for all of the work that you do every day to put on the mask and the gowns, to put yourself in potentially harm's way, to keep the people that we love healthy and safe. You are the truest of true heroes, and I thank you for that. I want to be able to support you in any way that I possibly can. We're going to do that through some of these videos, and I'm going to include in here my email so that you can reach out to me with any potential questions or concerns that you want to make sure that we address in these videos. They will be produced for you every Friday, and I want to make sure that there's some meaningful information in there for you. Thank you again for all that you do.